They may have lost their leader, but the Imagineers at WED Enterprises were determined to finish the Haunted Mansion. It was Walt's wish to have a haunted house, and after years of development, he never got to see it. The time had come for Disneyland to complete the attraction and get visitors through the doors of the stately manor next to the rivers of America. With the ride system chosen and the project in full force, Mark Davis and Claude Coates decided to compromise with their design differences. The whole ride experience would feature Mark's artwork, props, and characters placed in Claude's wonderfully crafted sets. As for whether the attraction would be funny or scary, they decided the first half of the experience would feature Claude's spine-chilling ambiance, but the second half would allow guests to leave the mansion with a light-hearted and cheerful mood. However, despite their compromises, neither of them could agree on a definite storyline for the ride, and so they simply omitted one, hoping the experience itself would carry the attraction. When Ex Atencio was brought in to write a script and song for the ride, he had a difficult task ahead of him. He was never a writer to begin with. Ex Atencio was an animator that Walt Disney brought over to WED during the development of Pirates of the Caribbean. It turned out that X had a talent for writing good lyrics and dialogue, and so he was the first person selected by Mark and Claude to write the show script for the mansion. When X had seen the plethora of randomness created by the team, he knew he had to find a way to tie it all in together. He remembered that Walt Disney had been advertising a place for ghosts to retire, and that Marty Sklar had created that sign that hung out front of the mansion for years at that point, hinting that ghosts could enjoy active retirement within. So, Ex Atencio decided to write a script around the idea that the mansion was a retirement home. There had been ideas of having a host tour the guests through the scenes, and X had tried to write the host as a menacing raven, but he realized the bird was too small to be noticed easily among the large sets, so he rewrote the host to be disembodied. Lastly, he drew more inspiration from Pirates of the Caribbean with the idea that you leave the attraction on a high note, bouncing in your vehicle to a catchy tune. That's when he wrote the song Grinning Ghosts, and partnered with studio composer Buddy Baker to create the music and song for the ride. It was decided that the ghost host would be narrated by voice actor Paul Frees, due to his uncanny ability to suddenly jump into character. After 10 years of development on a haunted house Walt Disney had wanted since 1951, the Haunted Mansion officially opened at Disneyland on August 12, 1969, 6 years after the completion of its stately facade on the hill, and at a cost of $7 million. But nevertheless, the Haunted Mansion was a great success, and it would solidify itself in history as one of the greatest Disneyland attractions ever built. And now, foolish mortals, take your loved ones by the hand, please, as I guide you through a chilling tour of the Haunted Mansion. Our tour begins here at the entrance, where you see a spine-tingling assortment of dreary foliage. While it's true that Walt would have insisted that the gardens of the manor be well tended and cared for, it was also important that the plants reflect the spooky nature of the experience within. A particular assortment of vegetation was chosen for the exterior. When these plants were combined into a garden, they appeared like something out of a horror film. You can find such foliage as the weeping cypress trees, Rocky Mountain junipers, and even false aralias. To the right of the mansion, you can see a grove of funeral cypress. These trees were originally arranged at the entrance of Tomorrowland from 1956 until 1966, when they were removed to make way for the new Tomorrowland of 1967. Imagineers couldn't bear to throw them away, so they were relocated to the mansion, adding to its eerie backdrop for decades since. Here in the garden, you might also spot a quaint little pet cemetery, but it wasn't always here. In the late 70s, they added a switchback queue and outdoor mausoleum to the south side of the mansion. This queue at one point wrapped around the back side of the mansion, making its way to the north side and back to the main entrance steps. There was a little lawn on the north side of the mansion, and so in the 1980s, Imagineers added a few gravestones to make a pet cemetery. But eventually, the queue was rerouted to stay entirely on the south side of the mansion, effectively rendering the pet cemetery abandoned. It wasn't until 1993 when Imagineers duplicated the original pet cemetery and installed a new one in the front garden. They also plussed it up by adding additional gravestones. However, the original pet cemetery still sits on the north lawn, just behind the ride exit where people can't easily see it. One last detail you may notice before entering the ride is a small hearse with an invisible horse harnessed to it. In the description below, I will put a link to a video that buries the biggest rumor of the hearse once and for all, but I'll try to summarize it as best I can. The hearse was purchased for Disneyland by Imagineer Bob Baranek for an Indiana Jones-themed stunt show in the year 1990. Though the stunt show never came to fruition, it was bought from a man named Dale Rickards of Malibu, who in turn purchased it in the 1970s from an eccentric collector, who claimed it was the hearse that carried Mormon prophet Brigham Young during his funeral. The hearse does date back to the Victorian era, but it turns out Brigham Young was carried by pallbearers, not by hearse. The hearse was added to the front of the Haunted Mansion in 1995 after extensive refurbishment, and it has been there since. As for the invisible horse hitched to it, well, that was Imagineer Tony Baxter's idea. Now follow me as we pass the boot scrapers by the front door and enter the mansion. Here is where we wait for our ghost host to begin the tour of the estate. The facade of the mansion itself is only large enough to fit the foyer, a hidden break room, and the two identical stretching rooms. The interesting thing about these galleries is that they act as a pre-show for the ride. It turns out this pre-show was installed as a necessity because in order to get park visitors to the large show building on the other side of the berm, you have to pass beneath the Disneyland Railroad tracks. This portrait gallery is actually the world's largest elevator and is designed to bring a large group of people downward. Interestingly enough, the hydraulic system it uses is not strong enough to lift a full room of 90 people back up, only 12. In order to disguise the elevator, it was decided to turn it into a haunted room that stretches before your very eyes. This was done by building the room into layers that can expand and retract like a telescope, lowering you 18.5 feet in total. Technically, you are only traveling 12.5 feet below ground because the mansion facade already sits 6 feet above normal ground level. Also, about the ceiling, it's actually made of theater scrim that looks solid when lit from the front, but when the lights go out and it's lit from behind, it becomes transparent. Before we leave the stretching room, I'd like to direct your attention to the portraits themselves. Each one was originally hand-painted by Mark Davis. They measure about 3 feet wide by 8 feet long. But would you be surprised if I told you that the paintings you see today look very different from the ones that debuted in 1969? That's because the portraits stretch and curl up hundreds of times a day. They eventually wear out and need to be replaced. But unfortunately, during the first decade of the Haunted Mansion's operation, photocopiers large enough to duplicate the portraits simply didn't exist. So every couple of years, the portraits had to be entirely repainted on new canvas by the hand of a different artist. The portraits we see today were likely painted in the 1980s and were immediately photocopied after they were finished. As a doorway suddenly appears, we are led into the portrait corridor. The walls used to be clad in antique Victorian-era wallpaper. It was purchased by Walt Disney himself, and he wanted it installed somewhere in the ride. It had a fuzzy texture in its design and was quite sturdy. Unfortunately, when the Haunted Mansion reopened after an extensive refurbishment in April of 2021, the Victorian wallpaper was replaced with a brand new pattern. At the end of the hallway are two busts that appear to follow you wherever you move. This effect was discovered by Rolly Crump and Yale Gracie when they had an inverted mask of Abraham Lincoln sitting on a table. When they walked past the backside of the mask, they were surprised by the astonishing illusion that Lincoln's eyes and head turned to follow them. These so-called busts are inverted in the same manner and lit from behind the wall with the light shining down, creating a very convincing effect. As for the changing portraits on the walls, they use a similar illusion to the ceiling of the stretching room, where they appear like normal paintings when lit from the front, because the ordinary image is silk-screened onto a theater scrim. The scrim is then stretched over a sheet of acrylic that has an alternate image on it. The front light used to gradually fade out, and a backlight behind the wall would illuminate the alternate image, which shined through the theater scrim. Today, these portraits change with the synchronization of the lightning, but it still works the same way. As your doom buggies appear from the dark depths of the Great Void, you enter this cavernous room. Imagineers had left most of it empty and black to represent the dark abyss of the spirit world. This room is 40 feet tall from floor to ceiling, and the only comfort from the mysterious darkness is the soft, warm glow of the candlelight flicker, where the air is deathly still. Here, massive cobwebs are created by making a support structure from fishing line, and then they use a special cobweb gun developed by the Imagineers to dress up the fishing line with tendrils of dusty web. When the Haunted Mansion reopened in April of 2021, this queue area was updated with additional theming added to the wall near the guests. The new wallpaper extends into this area, and in the darkness, you can make out the shape of a massive door, and a glowing blue ghostly orb shines its light through the transom above. Next to the door is a new portrait. Well, it's not actually new. The April through December painting was in the portrait corridor until it was replaced in 2005. But now the picture is back, and as you walk past it, the woman slowly ages. Your doom buggies descend from the infinite beyond into the loading area, and you are encouraged to board up to 3 bodies per buggy. And as your carriage ascends the grand staircase into the abyss, the real chills begin. We come upon the first scene, an endless hallway with a floating candelabra swaying from side to side. This illusion is rather genius, as the hallway is about 50 feet long at most, but a full-size mirror is at the end, reflecting the length of the hallway. You can't see the reflection of the candelabra because the backside is painted black. There is also theater scrim in front of the candelabra to give the hallway a misty effect, which also hides the reflection of the doom buggies as they pass. Another interesting thing about this scene is when the ghost host says,
"Every room has wall-to-wall creeps, and hot and cold running chills. Shh, listen."
His choice of words was such because this scene was originally going to have a ghost bride appearing occasionally in the hallway holding the floating candelabra. She would suddenly disappear, and a blast of refrigerated air would give you chills as you heard her footsteps walking past your buggy. As you pass by the conservatory on your right, you get your first glimpse of the raven that would have been your ghost host, as well as an undead casket occupant, voiced by Exitensio himself. Soon you glide away from the conservatory and into the corridor of doors, and by this point, you may have noticed the prevalence of a bluish-purple wallpaper that appears to be watching you. This wallpaper was developed by Tanya Norris, and in fact, it continues the theme of seeing faces in almost every inanimate object in the mansion, designed to give you the creeps. And as you pass the spinning hand of a clock striking the 13th hour, you may have heard this safety spiel.
"Playful spooks have interrupted our tour. Please remain seated in your doom buggy. We will proceed in just a moment."
That spiel was also the voice of show writer Exitensio. Some longtime fans of the mansion may remember when the ghost host used to have narration through this area, saying,
"Perhaps Madame Leota can establish contact. She has a remarkable head for materializing the disembodied."
This part of the narration existed up until almost a dozen years ago when it was finally shut off to make the transition to the holiday overlay much faster by having one less area of narration to reprogram every year. As we enter the seance circle, we discover a supernatural psychic medium calling the spirits to send us a message from somewhere beyond. The psychic, named Madame Leota, can be seen with only her head encased in a crystal ball as it floats around the room. The origins of this special effect began when Yale Gracie experimented by projecting a face of actor Hans Conried on the bust of Beethoven. When Walt saw it, he approved of it immediately. The original version of this seance circle had Madame Leota's crystal ball sitting in the center of the table, with a film projector supplying the imagery onto a featureless face. They used the likeness of Imagineer Leota Toombs to play the psychic medium, but her voice was a little too soft to be used in the final effect, so they called upon actress Eleanor Audley, who was known for voicing both Lady Tremaine and Maleficent, to provide the voice for Madame Leota. The projector aimed at Leota left an annoying glare on the glass of the ball, and for many years Imagineers tried to remedy this. At first they tried adding more light glare to camouflage it. In the early 2000s, they tried projection mapping technology to allow Leota's ball to float around the room, helping disguise the source of the glare. But the large projection angle required to accomplish this left Leota's face looking a little pixelated. But with recent technology, a micro-projector was placed inside the bust, and it projects onto a slightly transparent face, finally solving the issue. As we leave the seance circle, our doom buggies then pull onto a second-story balcony overlooking a grand hall and ballroom. We can see a hearse has crashed through the wall, allowing the spirits to funnel in from the boundless realm beyond. But while finally seeing the ghosts is rewarding to the riders, the baffling thing about this ballroom scene is the question it prompts us to ask: how was it done? After all, the ghosts are completely transparent and can disappear and reappear at random. Well, you may or may not have noticed the very large panes of 8-foot by 25-foot glass between you and the ballroom. These glass panels were brought into the park by helicopter and were installed by crane, and they're located in the middle of the building. If you wanted to get them out, it would have to be in shattered pieces. This whole room was considered the world's largest working Pepper's ghost effect, and the glass is necessary to make it work. Developed in the 1800s, the Pepper's ghost effect works by basically reflecting real objects or actors onto the glass. This gives them their transparent look and makes for a convincing ghost, especially if the object or actor is carefully placed on a separate stage or area of the stage. Here you can see that there are ghosts sitting in chairs. This is done by meticulously placing ghost animatronics in carefully calculated areas hidden from view. This means that the ghosts you see are located either on the level directly above or below your doom buggy. The Pepper's ghost effect can be a little confusing. When the dancers were installed and tested, Imagineers were dismayed to see that after all their hard work, the effect turned out backwards, as the women were leading the men into the dance, which can still be seen to this day. At the end of the ballroom, you can see a grand pipe organ being played by a ghost. This pipe organ was used in the movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It was brought to Disneyland in the 1950s for a Tomorrowland walkthrough themed to the movie. When the walkthrough closed to make way for the 1967 New Tomorrowland project, it was saved from destruction and placed here in the ballroom just 2 years later. And now we leave the ballroom and enter the attic. The attic's props have changed many times since 1969 because of constant theft during ride breakdowns or even stylistic changes during refurbishments. Previous versions of the bride in the attic were animatronics, some with their skin painted matte black. There even used to be pop-up ghosts who occasionally declared, "I do." The new version of the bride was introduced in 2006, and she is referred to as Constance Hatchaway. As you pass through the attic, you can see portraits of her marriage to several husbands, but in each one, the heads of the men suddenly disappear as Constance looks on menacingly. Constance is a controversy. Some fans think she appears like a failed projection mapping effect, but let me explain why Constance looks the way she does. Constance murdered husband after husband, accumulating wealth from each of them. After killing her final husband and inheriting the mansion we are touring, she settled down and lived into her old age, tying her story with the portrait of the old woman sitting on her husband's grave in the stretching room. She died of unknown causes one day, and all her wedding gifts, portraits, and even her wedding dress were placed in the attic. The wedding dress is displayed on an old Victorian dress mannequin, and Constance's spirit is possessing the dress as it sits on the mannequin. I'll admit though, this message is lost in translation, and the final effect can be mistaken for Disney's unwillingness to build an animatronic. And now, fellow mortals, we exit the attic and find ourselves on a balcony with the new Hatbox Ghost. But don't bother standing out front of the mansion trying to figure out which balcony this is, because before the year 2015, this wasn't a balcony at all. Basically, this is the roof of the second-story balcony. But when they installed the new Hatbox Ghost, they made this rooftop look like a balcony, complete with shade beams and potted plants. You won't find this area on the exterior of the mansion. One thing is for certain, there has always been a Hatbox Ghost whose head would disappear from his shoulders and reappear inside the glass hatbox. and this effect was synchronized with the beat of the bride's heart. However, it never worked well, and what's more, the removal of the Hatbox Ghost was permanent for many decades, leading people to believe it never existed in the first place. The new Hatbox Ghost is a rather deceptively complicated animatronic, combining traditional animatronic functions with the newer projection effects, like the one in the latest version of Madame Leota. The face of the ghost uses a microprojector within its skull, but the whole head can drop into the cavity of his body in order to complete the illusion that his head disappears. Furthermore, his hat is on a separate support structure which is designed to tilt left and right. When his head disappears, it suddenly reappears in the hatbox. This is done by projecting his face onto a curved mirror inside the hatbox. The doom buggies back away from the Hatbox Ghost, and we are suddenly falling gracefully off the roof and into the graveyard below. The graveyard scene is simply too large to create another Pepper's ghost effect, so it was decided the animatronics would have to look transparent, like ghosts. First, the AAs have no skin. Instead, the clear plastic forms that usually give the AA its shape were left as is. The clothing of the ghosts are made of varying materials, predominantly translucent vinyl. Due to the rather large amounts of simulated moonlight and blacklight, this room was too bright to be left as is because then riders could see the walls of the room, as well as the mechanical inner workings of the animatronics. So large scrims stretching from floor to ceiling were installed in this room between your doom buggy and the animatronics. This scrim provides the illusion of haze and preserves the illusions that would otherwise be revealed by the lights. And now we come upon the famous singing busts. They lead the vocals of the rousing ragtime rendition of Grinning Ghosts. Contrary to popular belief, these busts are not the face or voices of the famous Mellow Men group founded by Thurl Ravenscroft. However, they are celebrity voices of their own. From left to right, the singers are Vern Rowe, Thurl Ravenscroft, Chuck Schroeder, Jay Meyer, and Bob Ebright. Walt Disney is not one of them. Together, the busts are known as the Phantom Five. Before we exit the graveyard and come to the conclusion of the attraction, I have to point out that most of the faces of the ghosts in this ride are duplicates of the faces used in Pirates of the Caribbean, in order to save on time and costs. As a matter of fact, the old woman in the rocking chair in the ballroom scene is almost an exact replica of the grandmother from the Carousel of Progress. And now, dear mortals, as you pass through the mausoleum under the watchful eye of the cawing raven for the last time, we are warned to beware of hitchhiking ghosts. As you pass in front of 3 large mirrors, you can see that one of the hitchhiking ghosts is tagging along. This is accomplished because the mirrors are not actually mirrors at all. Instead, they are just windows into a blacked out room where animatronic ghosts pass on a turntable, moving at the same speed as the doom buggies. This wasn't originally intended to be this way. The idea was that you had no reflection. Only the ghost appeared to occupy your buggy. But during testing, the illusion never worked out, because no matter how they played with the light over the pods, people's reflection always appeared in the glass. This unloading area takes you underneath the Disneyland Railroad for your return to the park. You ascend the ramp and see little Leota. This time, both her face and voice belong to Leota Toombs. The ramp only has to take you 8.5 feet up, because the exit of the ride is 4 feet lower than the entrance. The Haunted Mansion has stolen our hearts and souls, and sealed itself into a list of Disneyland classics that we've all grown to cherish and wish to protect. Disneyland wouldn't be the same without this attraction. Nor would any modern ride special effect at a Disney park be able to accomplish the things that they have without the developments that Rolly Crump and Yale Gracie perfected. Though Walt Disney never got to see the Haunted Mansion completed, his imaginative legacy lives on in the spooky corridors of this Disneyland classic. The sheer amount of detail and artistry that went into its production, spanning over 10 years of labor, shows in its convincing ability to transport you into the spirit realm. Gliding through these ghostly halls in your own doom buggy has become another enchanting facet of Disneyland.
Now, I will raise the safety bar, and a ghost will follow you home.